Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 115, Meno 86d to 87b. Having broken the impasse preventing searching for virtue altogether, Socrates then asked Socrates to cooperate with him in searching for virtue, but even that is too much for Meno. He doesn't want to think at all, and this time his method of avoiding answering was simply to go back to the beginning and ask his original question, what sort of thing Socrates thinks virtue is. Is it something teachable, or something which comes to people by nature or by some other way? And this time he has removed the option of exercising. Is it something that can be exercised? I think that was a deliberate clue by Plato to the reader to realize that Meno doesn't want to exercise his mind. Socrates has just done his best to show Meno that someone who refuses to search is the opposite of virtuous. The vice Socrates had emphasized was cowardice, the opposite of bravery, Andrea, one of the virtues. Now that Meno has chosen not to search anyway, Socrates has added a further vice, the inability to control oneself. The problem with many young aristocrats is that they don't see controlling other people rather than oneself to be a vice. They see that as a virtue. This is probably one reason why Meno hasn't reacted. Socrates continues, «Επαιδε δεσου σαουτούμεν ουντ επιχειρές άρχεν, hine de eleutheros es, emud epicheres te archen kai arches, sun chores somaisoi, tigar chre poien». But since you don't even try to rule yourself so that you may be free, but you try to rule me, and you do indeed rule me, I shall give in to you. For what should I do? This is the second time in the dialogue that Socrates pretends to give in to Meno, and indeed, what is he to do otherwise? He wants Meno to stay in the conversation so that Socrates can apply his dialectical techniques in the hope that at some point Meno will realize that something is wrong with the way that he thinks. There's no point confronting him or telling him directly what he should be thinking, because then he's playing into Meno's own game of collecting opinions. Meno would then be able to say to his friends at home, Socrates thinks this, this, and this about people who are unable to control themselves or are cowardly, that sort of thing, without taking it seriously as referring to himself. Socrates then is now stuck with having to give Meno his opinion about the sort of thing that arete is. At the same time, Socrates doesn't want to give his opinion, because Meno would simply add it to the list of people with that opinion. So let's see what Socrates does. Eoiken uns skepteon enai poion tiestin ho me po ismen ho tiestin. It seems then that we have to search for what sort of thing something is, which we don't yet know what it is. This is simply a variation of something Socrates had said at the beginning of the dialogue, when he pointed out that in Attica people were so lacking in Sophia that not only did they not know what sort of thing arete was, but they didn't know what arete was at all. The implication was that we cannot know what sort of thing something is if we don't know what it is. And this is what led to Socrates asking Meno for definitions of arete. Now, however, because Meno insists, Socrates will look for what sort of thing arete is without knowing what it is. If what Socrates had said at the beginning of the dialogue was true, it wouldn't matter how insistent Meno was, there would simply be no way to look for the sort of thing arete is if we didn't know its essence. If it is possible to find some sort of attribute of arete without knowing its essence, then what Socrates said at the beginning of the dialogue was somewhat misleading, to say the least. It was actually an excuse to get Meno to have to answer the question what arete is. Clearly not because Socrates himself doesn't know anything about arete. Both he and Meno go on to show that they have some knowledge of arete, at least. So Socrates is asking Meno for definitions of arete in order to exercise Meno, because Meno now would rather simply listen to Socrates telling him things. Socrates has to do all the work, and yet he tries to involve Meno as much as possible. For example, he says that we don't yet know what arete is. He's careful not to say we must search, but it is to be searched, so as not to scare Meno off. Meti un alas mikronge moites arches halason, caesun choreson ex hypotheseos autoskopestai, ete didacton estin, ete opos un. So give me some slack from the beginning, if in nothing else, at least a small thing, and accept that this is being searched for by hypothesis, whether it is something teachable or however else. That however else is dropped immediately, and the hypothesis will concentrate on whether virtue is teachable. Before that, however, Socrates entertains Meno with an example of a hypothesis. Lego deto ex hypotheseos hode, hosper hoi geometrai polakis copuntai, epidantis eretai autus, hoion peri choriu, hoionte est tondeton cyclon todeto chorion trigonon entethenai, epoi antis hoti upo oida, est in tuto toiuton, al hospermentina hypothesin prurgu oimai echen prostopragmatoiande. Men est in tuto tochorion toiuton, hoion paraten dothesan autu grammen paratenante leipen toiuto chorio, hoion anau toto parateta menone, aloti sumbainen moidoke, kai alo au adunaton est in tauta pathen. Upothemenos un ethelo pensoi to sumbainon paratis entaseos autu eston kyklon, et adunaton et me. By hypothesis, I mean as the geometers often examine when someone asks them, for example, about area, if this triangular area can be stretched into this circle, one of the geometers would say, I don't know yet if it is such, but I think I have some such hypothesis which would be useful for this problem. If this area is such that stretching out from its given line is less than such an area equal to that same area already stretched out, It seems to me that this would lead to one conclusion, while if it were impossible for this to happen, that would lead to another conclusion. By hypothesizing, I am willing to tell you the conclusion about the stretching out of this area into this circle, whether it is impossible or not. Many have tried to explain what this hypothesis is about, but there is no real conclusion. Given that Socrates says this circle, this area, it is possible that he's drawing shapes in the sand in the way that he drew shapes in the sand with Meno's slave. We may imagine that Socrates draws a circle, and next to it he draws an area. We don't even know what shape that area is, but the problem is the area of that shape, whatever it is, if turned into a triangle, would that triangle fit in that circle? If this is indeed the problem, I don't see how that hypothesis actually helps. What is worth noting is that unlike Meno's slave, Socrates here doesn't test Meno at all. He doesn't ask him questions. He doesn't make him calculate. He simply allows Meno to enjoy this presentation of a hypothesis, as if Meno requires an example of a hypothesis. Does Meno not know what a hypothesis is? It's possible, but if so, this hasn't helped at all in searching for virtue, because Meno won't have any better idea about hypothesis after this example than he had before. A hypothesis parallel to this one about virtue and teachability would be that we don't know whether virtue is teachable, but if it is teachable, then something or other, and if it isn't teachable, then something else. And all we will learn from that is that something teachable has a certain property, something unteachable has some other property, and that doesn't tell us anything about virtue. For example, if it is teachable, then it has in it opinions or knowledge. But that is simply a characteristic of anything teachable, and it doesn't tell us anything about whether virtue is teachable or not. We'll see how Socrates handles this next time.